Hi, I'm Ryan from First Edition's Shrubs and Trees, and welcome to Steal the Look. I'm going to pop in as you watch this fantastic garden tour from our friends at Garden Gate Magazine to share design ideas, plant recommendations, regional tips, and so much more, all so that you can walk away knowing how to steal the look. Today we'll be touring Heidi Hyland's Sustainable Garden in Zone 4, Minnesota. Let's go!
I'm James Baggett with Garden Gate Magazine, and today we're visiting the garden of my friend Heidi Hyland. We are in Zone 4, Minnesota, and Heidi is an expert on a concept of gardening called permaculture, and her garden is a great example of it. And we're in about a 1 acre garden, and I thought maybe Heidi, before we even begin to explore your beautiful garden, you'd explain how you came to gardening a little bit.
Well, I think it was grace, because my great-grandmother's gardens were designed by the first female landscape architect in the nation, Ellen Biddle Shipman. And in books written about Ellen, Granny Franks' gardens are in those books. And I just think it came to me, serendipitously. I couldn't have chosen this career if I tried. I think it was ordained that I came into life in the garden.
So Heidi, will you explain some of the basic tenets of permaculture for us?
So some of the principles are things like observe and interact. So I watch my garden and then I make changes. And then I watch it again and I make additional changes. Another one is stacking functions. And that would mean things like, maybe my amelanchier over here, my serviceberry, feeds the birds, is a native, is drought tolerant, and provides great fall color. I mean, there's many benefits to one plant, and what are all of those stacking functions?
Heidi just mentioned amelanchier or serviceberry in her example of plants with stacking functions, and that's exactly why I love standing ovation serviceberry. This is an upright shrub that's great for hedging, privacy fences, or even as a focal point, and it's got multi-season interest, but also multi-season function. In the beginning of the year, you're going to see white flowers emerging late spring, so brightening up that landscape, especially for those of us in the cooler climates, giving some flower power early in the season. In June, those flowers are followed by blueberries that are great for birds to come and have a little snack. Great fall color on the foliage, and then in winter, that upright shrub has great structure, which is going to add some wonderful interest to the winter landscape.
And one of the things that I love the most about permaculture is the interplay of foliage of plants. How well does my cabbage look next to my barberry? And so I play with things on this lab. One of the reasons that I think it's important to put foods in our landscapes is because I believe that at some point it's going to be dictated to us that we can't irrigate our gardens unless there's foods, unless there are stacking functions, unless there's some benefits other than aesthetics. And so that's what I'm experimenting with here.
And Heidi's front yard is filled with asparagus and goji berries and watermelons and squash and cabbage, strawberries, grapes. We're going to explore that, but first we're going to have Heidi walk us through some of these basic tenets of permaculture. Hey, we're in Heidi's front yard, and Heidi, will you tell us what it is that we're seeing right here?
Well, I've got the orange rocket barberry with the thought that it will not only provide the color, but it'll keep the bunnies at bay. I have some bunny pressure up here, and so I'll use anything I can get to keep the bunnies at bay. And then I've got two varieties of cabbage in front of it, overplanted intentionally so that when I harvest, there's not gaping holes. And when the blue salvia is in color in front of it, it's really a marvelous combination.
And the cabbages look beautiful. There's no rabbit damage anywhere here.
None.
Heidi's use of barberry to keep the rabbits away from her cabbage is perfect. And barberry isn't invasive in Minnesota, so it works for her, but it might not work in your area. So if that's the case, plant something like a rose that has the thorns like campfire, stays low to the ground, keeps those critters away. Or if you want something with dense branching, try something like Jade Parade Sand Cherry, or if you're in a warmer climate, try something like Swing Low Distillium, which has that really dense branching, stays evergreen, and is incredibly disease resistant.
I also noticed you have white clover in your lawn. Is that purposeful as well?
Yes, it is. So I have a bee lawn. University of Minnesota came up with a recipe that includes the white clover, purslane, plantain, prunella, and it's just a marvelous way to invite those native bees into your landscape. And it means that you also don't have to water as much and mow as much.
If you're also interested in a turf replacement, contact your local university extension for plants that are native to your area.
And speaking about water, a lot of what we're going to talk about today in your garden involves water. And I'd love to take a look at your paving in your driveway, which is special.
Yeah.
Heidi, we were talking about the importance of water as a resource in the garden, and I noticed even your driveway is a special material. Will you tell us about it?
Yes, this is a permeable paver driveway, and it's a system that captures the water, not only when it rains from the sky, but it also captures it from the roof. So I use a rain chain and a French drain to divert the water from my roof into this system. So it captures more water than any driveway would, and it really is easy to manage and looks aesthetically pleasing, and the real goal is to dig down deeper so that there's a cavity below, if you will, to hold all of that water.
And prevent all of that runoff.
Correct.
This is a great practice that can be used in other areas of your landscape as well, and not just the driveway. Instead of pouring a concrete patio for your backyard entertainment space, consider using permeable pavers.
I gotcha. Heidi, right here beside the driveway, I noticed we have even more edibles. What do we have right here?
So the melon is Prescott Ford Blanc, and the watermelon is Yellow Baby. And I believe in front yard gardening. The kids next door come over here and harvest, and we can educate them about the next generation that's needed in the landscape.
And back here, I even noticed you have some squash going right here on the edge of the driveway.
Yep, I've got some petty pan squash, and I've got a zucchini behind us, and I've got a walking onion. It's all edible in this front yard with some color attached to it.
Can we take a look at some of the other edible combinations you've got going here?
Yeah, sure.
So Heidi, we're in your front border right on the street, and I notice here you've incorporated herbs and edibles as well.
Yeah, they're everywhere throughout the landscape. And here we've got goji berries, which will make a great hedge. I just transplanted them here this year off of a different part of the property. I think they're more effective here.
And they're beautiful.
Oh, they really are. And, you know, fun to make goji berry jam. I've also got dill that's self-seeded. I believe in things self-seeding, James. I mean, so much, plants get expensive. And if you can use things and self-seed, why wouldn't we? So the dill just comes back on its own, and I let it come back wherever it wants to that year. Many times there's a patch here, but it might be other places.
And you can also add it to your egg salad.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yes. And I've got lemongrass and amaranth and agastache. You know, all of them are great for bees.
And they're ornamental. It's a beautiful corner right here, but it's also functional as well.
That's right. They're medicinal. I use them for cut flowers.
Combining ornamental and edible plants is a great way to add stacking functions to the landscape. And a way that you can support that edible component is by planting cultivated native plants that draw pollinators in to help with that food production.
Heidi, I noticed you have this little skirt that's got clover and violets and purslane in it. What function does this play?
So the function of this is to keep the water on your land. So if the water's coming off of my property, it stops it before it goes to the boulevard. But maybe more importantly, James, as the water comes down the street, it hits my garden and it receives the water here, slows the flow, cools the water before it heads down to the storm sewer.
Even filters it.
Correct.
Oh.
Yep. So it's a rain garden of sorts.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Rain gardens, which Heidi just mentioned, are an important part of sustainable landscaping as they help filter stormwater, minimize flooding and drainage issues, resupply groundwater, and provide habitats for wildlife and pollinators. Rain gardens can be located near impervious surfaces like driveways or roads to help capture as much of that runoff as possible. Now, as for the plants, it's important to plant things that can thrive in that standing water as well as attract pollinators. Some of my go-to shrubs for rain gardens are Fiber Optics Buttonbush, Fire Dance Dogwood, and Wildfire Winterberry.
We're in Heidi's front yard here in Minnesota, and there's a lot of stuff going on. We've got apple trees, asparagus, strawberries, even grapes. You want to tell us about how you combine all these together, even blueberries over here?
You know, I believe, James, that strawberries make a great ground cover. Blueberries are an awesome hedge, and asparagus rivals the look of any perennial grass I've ever seen. You can have these edible and functional landscapes, and they're right here in the front yard, close to the kitchen, easy for me to harvest.
Couldn't get any easier than being
Yeah,
right here on the vine. And these grapes look like they're almost ready.
They're pretty close, I know. It's the best year for them so far, other than the Japanese beetle pressure. But, you know, that's something we should talk about too. It's a little unnerving maybe that they're there, but it didn't damage the fruit.
And it doesn't affect the health of the plant.
No, of course not. So fair share is another permaculture principle. There's enough for everybody. I believe that's true.
I love that fair share principle. It's really important for us gardeners to remember that our garden's home to neighborhood wildlife, and sometimes they get hungry and they eat something, or we have a weather event. At First Editions, we get questions all the time wondering if that is going to permanently damage our plant or if it's going to recover. So if you've got questions, always feel free to reach out to us at First Editions Shrubs and Trees.
You also have a easy way to prune that makes your life easier and just makes common sense. Do you want to explain it to us?
Yep, chop and drop.
Yeah.
I'm not a lazy gardener, I'm a busy gardener. So I keep my pruners handy at all times. And I might take something like this comfrey plant and cut off before the bloom comes so that it doesn't self-seed everywhere. And comfrey is a great plant. It's called a bioaccumulator because it produces so much mass and it will decompose right where I leave it in my garden. Chop and drop right there so it can feed the plants that need it instead of bringing it to a compost heap and then bringing it back up into the garden.
It makes good sense. We're in Heidi's front yard and I notice a lot of really ornamental and beautiful native plants. And it's important to know the difference between native plants and cultivated plants, but also for folks to learn the botanical Latin names of these plants.
Yeah, and I think it's intimidating, James, but it doesn't need to be because I might say clematis and you might say clematis. That's okay, but we need to try to say those botanical names because something like this native Liatris, Ligula stylus, really does attract more monarchs than a cultivar of that native.
I understand. What are some of these other native plants I see right here?
One of my favorites is the Amsonia hubrechtii. It's got a great blue flower in the spring, but it's more grown for this foliar effect.
Especially in the autumn.
Correct.
Yeah.
And because it's set off next to this Rudbeckia hirta, which is a biennial. So a biennial grows the first year, blooms the second, and then it dies. We talked about self-seeding earlier for annuals. I love self-seeding biennials as well because they just magically pop around the garden.
And look at how beautiful this is right now.
Fantastic.
But also, what about cultivars of native plants like I see here?
Yeah, so we know native little blue stem.
Which
It's
is a great plant.
fantastic. But our local expert, Dr. Mary Meyer, who knows so much about grasses, has introduced this little blue stem called Blue Heaven.
Blue Heaven.
So it's a cultivar of a native called a nativar then, right? Because you're using a native plant that's just been cultivated for improved color and it stands up, it doesn't lodge like sometimes the native blue stem can.
And the wildlife has that same relationship with this plant.
Yes, it does.
Because the pollinators and the insects evolved with these native plants.
They did,
I gotcha.
exactly.
It makes sense.
I absolutely agree with James and Heidi. Nativars definitely have a place in the landscape. They take all that's great about that native species, but make it accessible for your home garden, meaning it might have a better shape, might have a better size, might have more flower power. And some of my favorite nativars are Cobalt and Gold Hypericum, Fireside Ninebark, Tiger Eyes Sumac, or, like I mentioned previously in this video, Fibroptex Buttonbush and Wildfire Winterberry.
So Heidi, I also noticed you have this very attractive rain chain here. Do you want to explain the role that that plays in all of this?
So instead of a downspout, we put the chain here so that the water moves down the chain, goes into a French drain, and then dead ends into my permeable paver driveway system. So it captures the water. But I think, James, the more important piece of it is you recognize how much water comes down in one storm event. It's pretty remarkable. When the water's hidden behind a downspout, we have no concept how much water is moving. So it educates us, but it's also really pretty. It moves the water, we get to experience it, and it makes a sound. And then in the winter, it ices up. And we put holiday lights in it, and it's a really marvelous experience all seasons.
What a great idea for all of us. Heidi, thank you for sharing your garden and these very easy, basic ideas for all of us to garden more sustainably and more in sync with the environment. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I learn a lot from you too, so thanks for coming to my yard.
Thank you, Heidi.
And there you have it. Thank you so much to Heidi for welcoming us to her fabulous Zone 4 Sustainable Garden to teach us all about permaculture, and special thanks to James and the Garden Gate magazine team for leading the tour. I hope you enjoyed and can walk away with tons of inspiration and ideas on how how to steal the look and make it a reality in your garden. Make sure to share your gardens with us at First Edition's Shrubs and Trees because I love to see what you create. Happy gardening, and I'll see you next time on Steal the Look.